Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I've been here for 20 years and I've never seen a jump like this.
The cold reality as inflation hits a 30-year high. And
it's frustrating paying for daycare and not getting it.
Confusion and mixed messaging around COVID and daycares. Why some are fed up. More people are wearing N95 masks, but do you really need one? We look at the alternatives.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The inflation rate has climbed to a 30-year high. Big price increases in everything from housing to gas and groceries. Jacqueline Hansen has our top story and she's looking at why.
Food prices continue to take a bite out of Canadians' budgets.
I'm looking for more sales than I did maybe previously.
In December, compared to a year earlier, prices for fresh fruit, sugar, cereals, and meats all jumped.
I've been here for 20 years and I've never seen a jump like this.
Statistics Canada says global supply chain disruptions are still a problem. When lockdowns lifted and economies reopened, many Canadians and Americans had savings to spend. But production and shipping struggled to catch up with demand. Adverse weather events have added more challenges, plus labor shortages continue to be a common complaint from businesses.
We had one company last week completely cancel our order because they did not have the staff to fulfill the order, and then they didn't have the truck driver to drive the product to the store, so we didn't get any of that product in. It stopped.
At this grocery store, there's concern that will get worse if fewer truck drivers can cross the border from the U.S. to Canada because of the new vaccine mandate.
How do you get that product here? How do you get that product on our shelves? It's gonna be big.
It's not just the price of food that's gone up. The cost of shelter, home and mortgage insurance, building supplies, vehicles and flights have all increased, and wages aren't keeping up. But that could change.
So 2022, in my opinion, is going to be a catch-up year where very tight labor markets have more people going to their bosses and saying, pay up.
The Bank of Canada surveys business owners and consumers to get a sense of what they expect to happen with inflation. And neither group expects it to get back to the bank's target of 2% anytime soon.
If the supply chain doesn't improve, then yeah, it's going to either continue to go up or stay the same.
The central bank is increasingly expected to step in and raise interest rates even as early as next week. That would be one way for the bank to say, don't worry, we've got this high inflation under control. And that is the kind of message that many businesses and consumers likely need to hear right now. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
And later in the show, I'll be speaking more about this with an economist, and we'll find out how our pandemic shopping habits could be influencing the rising cost of living. Well, one of BC's largest grocery stores is introducing capacity limits to curtail the spread of the Omicron variant. In a statement to the CBC, Save On Foods says it will operate all of its stores at 50% occupancy until further notice. It has put an occupancy counter at the front of each store, and staff will be increasing signage in congested areas such as the deli and bakery. That'll reinforce physical distancing. The capacity restrictions come at a time when many grocers are dealing with staff and supply shortages.
Got a very safe program here where people any kind of symptom are asked to stay home. They have a protocol to follow through HR. They go through an assessment, maybe they have to call 811, but generally any symptoms, they stay home. So it ends up being a little short at times.
This store in Victoria says it has had to operate without 10 to 15% of its regular staffing levels. And though it has not been as badly impacted as others across the province, the staff shortage is the worst they've had to deal with since the start of the pandemic. From what's considered an outbreak to who is allowed to visit, these are the questions some long-term care home operators are wrestling with amid a recent COVID-19 surge in their facilities. As John Hernandez reports, there's been a lack of clarity from the province after the latest round of restrictions.
Like many care homes in BC, COVID-19 cases have been rising at Menno Hospital in Abbotsford.
This time we saw the numbers mounting.
CEO Karen Biggs says dozens of residents and staff have tested positive for the virus during the Omicron surge, but an official outbreak wasn't declared by a provincial medical health officer until just yesterday.
We were surprised, and we actually asked for clarification, but there wasn't real clarification on what an outbreak is considered now.
Earlier in the pandemic, just one case inside a care home could be considered an outbreak, but that measure isn't being used anymore, and care providers aren't clear on what the new definition is.
We don't really know. It's up to the medical health officer in each health authority to determine if a home that has COVID is put on outbreak or not.
The BC Care Providers Association says the issue is one of a number of ambiguities looming over long-term care homes since the latest round of restrictions to curb the Omicron spread. Operators also aren't clear on exactly who is considered an essential visitor.
We really want to clear up this essential visitor definition because it leaves operators in an uncomfortable position of having to determine whether you meet the criteria as an essential visitor.
Definitions, the province says, have been evolving over the fifth wave, largely because of milder illness inside the facilities.
So we are revising our approach to outbreaks because we're finding that the measures that we put in place that have been very, very strict around COVID outbreaks in long-term care homes are causing more harm than Omicron is at the moment.
The Care Providers Association met with health officials today asking for simplified guidelines moving forward and more rapid tests. They say they're expecting some much-needed clarity in the coming days. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC hospitals are now treating almost 900 patients with COVID-19. That number has been rising steadily and is a jump of at least 41 since yesterday. There are 115 people in critical care. 50 of them are unvaccinated. 3 of those unvaccinated ICU patients are youth aged 19 or younger. 13 more people have died in the last 24 hours. That's the most in a single day since late October. BC has declared outbreaks for an additional 9 healthcare facilities. There are 53 ongoing, with 6 declared over since yesterday. Well, COVID-19 prison outbreaks are growing in BC. In Abbotsford at the Matsqui Institution, we're learning today that 28 inmates have tested positive. 20% of inmates there are unvaccinated, though the immunization campaign has been going on for a year now. With a growing number of COVID cases at prisons across the country, there are calls to depopulate the facilities. At Kent Institution in Agassiz, there are just over 110 cases as the outbreak there enters its 4th week. Well, we've seen how COVID has left businesses across the province reeling. Now those organizations still closed because of the pandemic restrictions can apply for twice as much relief funding. The province is doubling the amount of money available. Owners can apply for a closure relief grant and get up to $20,000, an increase from the $10,000 initially available. Eligible businesses include bars and nightclubs that don't serve full meals, as well as event venues forced to close because of cancellations. Childcare providers and parents in BC say they are frustrated with the province's self-isolation guidelines. The BC Centre for Disease Control says after a COVID-19 exposure, unvaccinated people have to quarantine for 10 days. But as Janella Hamilton reports, the province's top doctor is saying otherwise, and that is leaving families confused.
Jessie Prosky has been home from work with her 2-year-old daughter for almost a month now.
If my child was sick, that, would make sense to be home. But my daughter hasn't even had one symptom of sickness. And now, we're missing 3 weeks of daycare.
It's because of multiple COVID exposures at daycare.
It's frustrating, and I'm paying for daycare and, I'm not getting it.
The BC CDC guidelines say anyone unvaccinated and in contact with a COVID-19 exposure must isolate for 10 days. But that's not what BC's top doctor is saying.
When they're better and able to fully participate in activities, they can go back to school or childcare.
Prosky says her child hasn't had any symptoms and having her in quarantine for a month has been challenging. She's not the only parent feeling frustrated over the province's mixed messages.
The confusing part for us is the inconsistency with what's happening in the school system and how it's being treated in schools compared to how it's being managed for daycares, which is very, very different.
The Early Childhood Educators of BC says daycares must follow BC CDC guidelines.
Parents hear that, and then if something happens before we get the guidelines, we're the one that's going to get the brunt. Like they'll, that's not right. Dr. Bonnie Henry said, and that's where the confusion.
And the onus has been placed on daycare operators to interpret and adapt to the changing public health protocols.
Why is such an important sector with such a vulnerable population, a sector that's already in crisis with staffing and so many other things, lack of recognition, why are we not included? Why have we been left out?
When asked on CBC Radio's On the Coast today, Dr. Henry said this.
We have an ongoing forum where we meet regularly with representatives from the early childhood educators. I know it's been challenging.
But there's still no clear answer on what rules parents should be following. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
The pandemic is exposing weaknesses in many services, and that includes mental health care. The BC Psychological Association is urging the government to provide suitable treatment through the public health system. The organization is proposing psychologists work alongside family doctors to provide same-day, on-the-spot care known as wraparound care. An advocate says it would not look like therapy as we know it. Rather than hour-long sessions that cost hundreds of dollars every few weeks, psychologists would be integrated within a family doctor office, and all patients would have equal access.
Is typically with what we call a warm handoff. So rather than kind of having a waitlist system or where you get kind of a referral put in and you're sort of waiting to hear back from this other person, most of the time the way that it works is the doctor says, I've got this psychologist down the hall. If you can wait a few minutes, they're going to pop in. And by placing psychologists into primary care, we're sending that same message that this is really okay. This is your health. And all of these things are a part of your health. Depression is a part of your health. Pain is a part of your health. Sleep is a part of your health, as are cuts and bruises and ailments and all of those other things.
She points to similar models in the UK, New Zealand, and Australia, and says BC's primary care network is already expanding to include other specialists like pharmacists and nurse practitioners. Well, you've probably noticed more and more people wearing N95 or KN95 masks. These are respirators that create a seal on your face and offer even more protection as the Omicron variant surges. Here's what you need to know about wearing the masks and caring for them.
You've probably noticed more and more people using N95 and KN95 masks. These are respirators that create a seal around your face, providing even more protection against the Omicron variant. If you do choose to wear one of these masks, here's what you need to know about how to wear and care for it.
In the hospital environment and in healthcare environments, we do what's called fit testing. In other words, we verify through a procedure that mask fits your face, that it provides effective enough seal, that the breathing is going through the mask and therefore living up to its efficiency of 95% reduction in the inspiration of particles of a certain size. If it's not fit tested, and particularly people have different shapes and sizes to their face, then the mask is not really meeting that 95% efficiency target.
The Public Health Agency of Canada says that you can still wear these masks even if they haven't been professionally fitted. The trick is to mold it to the shape of your face in order to create a seal. Now, one way of testing how well you did is to blow into the mask. If you can feel air coming out the top or if your glasses are fogging up, it's a sign that you haven't sealed it properly. Normally, these masks are not intended to be worn more than one time, but that advice has now changed because so many people are wearing them so often. And unlike cloth masks, you can't wash them. So after you wear them one time, you should store them somewhere safe for at least a week or hang them up somewhere dry, and no single mask should be used more than 10 times.
A regular surgical mask, for instance, that we tend to use and we see people using, it has a filtration capacity of about 80%. So there's only a marginal improvement in N95s, particularly if they're not fit tested. And I think that's the real challenge.
If you can't get an N95 mask, wearing a normal cloth mask over a medical mask will still provide you with good protection. The most important thing is to find a mask that fits your face well and that you can wear consistently.
The Canucks have announced when the team will play all those games that were canceled over the past few weeks. In total, 7 games were postponed because of COVID outbreaks on various teams across the league and also capacity limits at Rogers Arena. Nearly all the games will be made up at home in February during what would have been a break for the Olympics. Notable games include the Toronto Maple Leafs visit on February 12th and the first time the Canucks host the Seattle Kraken on the 21st. Vancouver police have released video of a disturbing random attack on New Year's Eve, and they're asking for help in identifying the suspect. A warning, the video you are about to see may be disturbing. The attack happened on December 31st around 3:30 p.m. along West Georgia Street. A 22-year-old woman was walking in front of Hotel Georgia when she was grabbed by a man walking in the opposite direction. She was thrown against the exterior wall of the hotel and held down. The woman was able to free herself from the attacker.
Obviously a very concerning incident. This victim was just walking along the street, minding her own business when this occurred. It is unclear if it's racially motivated. We do need to look at all the circumstances, and that's also why we are appealing for witnesses to come forward.
The suspect is described as a white, middle-aged man. He was wearing gray pants, a black jacket on top of a black shirt with a logo in the middle, and a black toque. He was last seen walking east on West Georgia. Anyone with information is asked to contact police. A man has been charged in the stabbing death of his girlfriend at Metrotown Mall last month. 25-year-old Melissa Blimke was found in the parkade after being stabbed before noon on December 19th. She later died in hospital. 31-year-old Everton Downey has been charged with second-degree murder and remains in custody. The RCMP says the two were in a relationship for some time prior to the homicide. Blimke was from North Vancouver. More than 200 Afghan refugees have arrived in Vancouver. That's the most to reach this province since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan in August. Ottawa says they are people who worked closely with Canada in Afghanistan, along with their families. Those most recent arrivals are among 7,000 refugees who recently landed in this country on a chartered flight from Pakistan. The BC government says it set up $2 million in funding to help families who resettle in the province. And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is at the center of an ethics controversy tonight. It's over a piece of furniture he and his wife were given for free. As Olivia Stefanovich explains, while it's not a first in Canadian politics, some say Singh's situation could be uniquely complicated.
A tender moment between Jagmeet Singh and his newborn, landing the NDP leader in controversy.
I don't think it's a good practice.
Singh tagged Monty Design, a Canadian furniture company that gave his wife this rocking chair.
So I get home and I see that our rocker has come in and it is absolutely stunning.
In exchange for posting about it on her Instagram account.
Made in Canada. Check them out.
The rocker worth nearly $2,000.
We should not use our social media networks while in elected office for private profit.
Under the Conflict of Interest Code, neither MPs nor any family members can accept gifts that might reasonably be seen to influence the member.
It's the tagging of the company that seems a little odd to me. He's kind of like, hey, here's your rocking chair that you gave my wife. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Some tokens under $200 are allowed with conditions. Anything more must be reported to the Ethics Commissioner's office within 60 days.
Mr. Singh's spouse has to be very careful about the gifts that she receives.
The Prime Minister's wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, faced similar criticism after a $7,000 diamond brooch she wore appeared in a press release by Burke's.
Are you new here? Yeah.
But some say the issue facing the NDP leader is more complicated, since Singh's wife, Gurkiran Kaur Sidhu, is a social media influencer.
but it is legitimately a line of work that furnishes people with income, with credibility, with a lifestyle. And so to say you can't do that outright, open and shut, I think more examination is necessary.
The NDP says Singh repaid the company for the chair, but the political price could be higher if the ethics commissioner launches an investigation. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Many travelers are no doubt feeling relieved that Coquihalla is open once again between Hope and Merritt after this fall's devastating floods. But BC's Transportation Ministry has a warning for anyone driving the route. Yeah, don't pull over for a selfie. The ministry says it's heard people are stopping along the highway to snap photos, and while it knows the repair work is impressive, stopping puts yourself and others in danger. Instead, it offers the pictures that have already been taken by the province. Crews worked around the clock to make temporary repairs after floods tore the highway apart. Now it's lower speeds and single-lane traffic. The ministry also reminds travelers to have enough gas, saying staff helped top up 2 vehicles that had run out this afternoon.
The weather update is brought to you by Sophia Financial Group of Raymond James Limited. Register now for our free Cash Flow Connection series at sophiaevents.ca.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe is here now with the forecast. I can see how the selfies would be tempting. It's pretty stunning, the work that they've done.
Yes, I'm pleased, though, that they offered professional ministry photos because I wanted to see. So, yeah, impressive and quick work done nonetheless. It is raining out here. As you can see, the steadier rain has moved back in. I like how you messaged me just before the show. You're wearing your hood and you're outside, aren't you? And yes, that is what's happening. The raindrops bigger in size than drizzle. We can full on say it's raining. Take a look at the radar. It's coming in fairly heavily thanks to a warm front that will continue to push those showers from west to east across the south coast overnight and into tomorrow morning. We've got some heavier bands of moisture just tracking through to Fino down around Port Renfrew. That'll work its way into Metro Vancouver overnight. Most of the rain should end around 7 a.m. This is a bit of a front, so we'll see some gusty winds through the early morning hours, but I actually think we'll see some dramatic clearing as we head into the afternoon. I think tomorrow looking like a good day for a mix of sun and cloud. And temperatures have also been fairly steady. In fact, we hit 9 at YVR earlier today, coming down a couple of degrees tonight. We could be back up to the double digits for tomorrow. So we're not done with the warm weather. But Anita, still a lot of discussion about the fog versus the sunshine. So that is still being debated. I think we've got a better chance of seeing the sun tomorrow afternoon, but I'll break down the debate a little bit later on in the show.
Okay, I can't wait for it. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Well, just a few short years after retiring their old logo, the Baron, Lillooet Secondary School is looking for a change once more. In 2017, the school settled on wildfire and this logo of a flame with 2 axes underneath. But after watching the devastation created by the Lytton and Elephant Hill fires in the last few years, the school says the logo is now viewed in a different light.
Regardless of what it means to us, we can't ignore the effect that, the impact that it has on our neighbors and people we care about in the surrounding communities. And we after some reflection over the few months, we thought, we just can't really celebrate this logo the way we would want to, and the way, our students deserve something that they can really be excited about.
The school says past and present students, along with the community, will be involved in the new design process. They expect to have a new logo and mascot ready by June.
When you have 6 patients that need a life-saving medication and you have to choose 1 or 2, that's a huge burden to carry.
The stark choices hitting medical staff in Ontario as more and more unvaccinated patients fill their hospitals. That's coming up. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, a father and daughter from Saskatchewan are over the moon about their latest discovery. The self-proclaimed treasure hunters have been looking for ancient fossils since the girl was 6 years old. They've also created a mini museum to show off their finds. Take a look.
Hey, how's it going? Welcome. Come on in. Come check out our kids' mini museum. and the kids went and decided to build a museum to show and spotlight and show people what we got.
That's an ammonite, and my favorite part about it is all the colors.
This specimen, it's about a 70 million year old ammonite from the Cretaceous period. So it's a jackpot in a sense of what we've been after. We weren't expecting to find one. Lily was looking up into a little piece of area that had been washed away by the rain, and we go up, and sure enough, it ended up being a really massive specimen. When you do find something, you still have to report it to the authority, because if there is still a scientific value to that, if it's a rare specimen or something that has never been found before.
I feel really excited because that I'm the real owner of it.
You can go to any museum, you know, and it's really cool seeing all of these specimens, but when you have the adventure behind it and, you know, having to learn how to do it properly. This is a mammoth tooth. This piece here, this is a baculite.
Angel wings.
A replica of Scotty the T-Rex's tooth. When you're down there and seeing that magic and being a part of it, especially when you got kids involved, it's awesome.
The first shipments of a new oral medication against COVID-19 have arrived in Canada and are being distributed to the provinces and territories. As David Cochrane tells us, Justin Trudeau says although the pills are another tool to use against the virus, they are not a replacement for vaccines.
After a 2-day weather delay, it's back to the classroom for students in Canada's largest city, bringing joy for some.
What a relief. Freedom. Yeah, the kids need to go back to school. It's just too much on the parents.
Caution for others.
There's always that baseline of anxiety, but she's got her first shot. My wife and I are both boosted, so we're feeling pretty confident.
From the Prime Minister, it brought a warning.
Parents are worried about the health of their kids, therefore get them vaccinated. The vaccination rate for kids 5 to 12 is too low in Canada.
In Canada, the first kids aged 5 to 11 got their shots in late November. Since then, the government says only about 3% are fully vaccinated. Some of that is understandable given the timing of the vaccine's approval and the advice to wait 8 weeks between doses. But with enough supply to fully vaccinate every kid in Canada, the percentage with just one dose is still low.
48% of children ages 5 to 11 have received their first dose.
So less than half have even limited protection, as the vast majority of students head back to school and cases across the country still haven't hit their peak.
It's never too late to do the right thing, and the health worker who will be helping you get vaccinated would much rather be giving you a vaccine than intubating you in the ICU.
It's a much different picture with students aged 12 and up, where 83% are fully vaccinated, a much higher number that Justin Trudeau says should be even higher. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
Of the more than 10,000 hospitalized COVID patients in Canada, Ontario is home to more than 1 in 3. Nearly 600 people are in the province's ICUs, and dozens are dying every day. Christine Birak takes us inside one hospital there where critical medicines are being rationed by lottery.
The scenes unfolding inside the intensive care unit at Scarborough General Hospital can be tough to watch, as nearly every bed is now taken.
Can I get another IV pump?
Life here is incredibly fragile, even for the vaccinated. This COVID patient in his 60s suddenly started gasping for air. Dr. Martin Betts is the medical director of critical care for the Scarborough Health Network. He says this patient had been talking and stable for days. Now he needed to be intubated.
It's a real challenge to be able to describe what you just saw. It's difficult for people to appreciate. Really the severity of the illnesses these people are suffering from and the intensity of the interventions.
It's a scene that's playing out in ICUs across the country. Exhausted and short-staffed, healthcare workers are struggling to save every life they possibly can. Betts says none of the patients here have had third doses, and roughly 75% are unvaccinated.
One disturbing trend that we've seen is relatively elderly patients that may be in the community getting advice from their kids and middle age, where they may have strong views against the vaccine for themselves, but I think the risk equation for their elderly parents is actually different.
On top of that, some hospitals are now running out of potentially life-saving drugs for COVID patients, forcing doctors here to use a lottery system.
When you have 6 patients that need a life-saving medication and you have to choose 1 or 2, that's a huge burden to carry. And this takes some of that away and makes sure it's a fair system.
It's an ethical scenario where perhaps lotteries are probably the only fair way instead of picking who might survive.
Hospitals have been sharing supplies of 2 arthritis drugs in particular. Pharmacists say those medications have been shown to save about 1 in every 20 patients by reducing inflammation.
Tocilizumab was the primary choice. It's the one with the best evidence. And as its shortages ran low, we started using the other drug. And then that impacted its supply because it wasn't ready for that increase in demand either.
1, 2, 3.
While hunting for new medications, healthcare workers are routinely turning COVID patients face down. Labor-intensive, but it can help lung function. Romeo Reyes spends several hours a day face down in his bed. At 80 years old, he was double vaccinated, but caught COVID during the holidays. Now he's in a medically induced coma.
I'm really grateful for the doctors and the staff.
His daughter checks in every day, hoping for good news.
We just want to see things start to turn the corner and start to improve, and we're hopeful and optimistic. It's just ahead of us a little bit.
Tensions in Ukraine are high amid fears of a Russian invasion. The U.S. has sent substantial high-tech military support to Ukraine, but Canada is holding back. Murray Brewster looks at what's behind the reluctance and what it says about NATO's divided position on countering Russian aggression.
This is what Ukraine wants from its allies: ultra-high-tech weapons. In this case, tank-busting missiles, courtesy of the British, delivered this week. Canada hesitated after it was asked for other kinds of munitions.
One of the things that we have seen is that Russia is looking for excuses or reasons to continue and even escalate its aggression against Ukraine. The decisions that we take will be based on what is best for the people of Ukraine and what is best towards keeping peace globally as long as we possibly can.
Canada was one of the first nations in the door for the multilateral military training mission in Ukraine, an almost 7-year commitment that's due to be extended in March. A commitment underscored with Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly's visit with troops this week. She also met with her French counterpart in Paris. Like Canada, several European members of NATO are reluctant to ship weapons, not wanting to further antagonize Moscow. Experts have noticed Canada's pivot.
Up until from 2014-15, when all this started, this conflict started, up until just like now, Canada has been amongst the biggest hardliners.
Caught in the middle of this desperate international high wire act, the people of Ukraine and this young woman.
Because I heard rumors that Putin wants to go to Kiev. This is really scary.
Although not publicly acknowledged, what the Ukrainians are interested in particular, are Canadian anti-aircraft weapons and satellite surveillance systems. Critics say the time to ship them is now, not after an invasion. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
He earned the nickname the Liquidator for buying struggling businesses and shutting them down. But over the past 3 decades, Robert Roche has also left a trail of debt across Canada, and he's been convicted of fraud 4 times. CBC News has learned Roche received substantial government pandemic support, while more than a dozen of his now former employees are still waiting to get paid. Senior investigative reporter Jonathan Gatehouse has the details.
We feel stolen from.
For Haley O'Brien, a job at PPE supply company Antiseptic Pro seemed like a good get during a pandemic. But soon she found herself among a group of 14 ex-employees, filing claims with Ontario's Labour Ministry for missing paychecks.
It's wage theft. We want to know where this money's going.
Kevin Lee was hired by Antiseptic Pro owner Rob Roche last summer to design a website. After asking about the month of pay he was owed, he was fired on the spot.
Well, it feels really disgusting.
Documents obtained by CBC News show companies owned by Roche received at least $85,000 in government subsidies, from provincial and federal pandemic assistance to training grants for new hires, even as unpaid wage claims piled up against him. We tried to ask Roche about the complaints, but for weeks he deflected our interview requests.
Yeah, I will get back to you shortly, okay?
Even when we paid him a visit at his Toronto office.
Hey, Mr. Roche.
But that attempt did prompt him to send this video statement a day later, flanked by employees, saying he's working on a deal with the province to repay the wages, and that he's seeking a federal payroll audit.
With reference to the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, we have asked the Canada Revenue Agency to conduct a trust account audit for the past 2 years to prove our transparency.
Roche declined to provide documents to back up those claims. In a statement, Ontario's Ministry of Labour says investigations are ongoing, but confirmed it has issued 12 orders to pay so far. Court files show a pattern of unpaid wages and debts going back almost 30 years, and claims from former employees across Canada, including Manitoba, where Roche bought and shuttered StyleRite, a discount department store chain in 1995, throwing 400 people out of work. Records also reveal Roche has 4 separate fraud convictions, the last in 2001, netting him a year in jail. After a series of failed businesses in Europe, Antiseptic Pro is just the latest Canadian venture for Roche, following investments in everything from vocal coaching to Viagra sales, leaving his former employees to wonder how the liquidator can keep starting new companies without paying his old staff. Jonathan Gatehouse, CBC News, Toronto.
If you're feeling like your wallet is emptying a little faster every month, you're not imagining things. So why are costs soaring and what might be done about it? We talk all things inflation next.
To Vancouver now, and the APEC inquiry, version 2. There are some new faces and a new timetable. The issues, well, they are the same. Today, as Ian Hannamansing reports, the date was set for the inquiry to resume.
It was a reunion of sorts for the veterans of the first APEC hearing as they got ready for round 2. And among the familiar faces, some notable new ones, including former Judge Ted Hughes, recently appointed to the RCMP Complaints Commission. He replaces the 3-person panel, which resigned in December amid charges and countercharges of bias and interference. Now the APEC hearing will begin anew, and Hughes says all the witnesses will be returning to the stand.
I think with credibility being an issue, I wouldn't be prepared to take the evidence of those who have appeared before on the basis of a transcript.
And all of the APEC issues will be given a fresh hearing beginning January 27th. At the top of the agenda, a demand by anti-APEC protesters that the federal government pay for their lawyers and that the commission investigate what role the Prime Minister or his advisors may have played in directing the RCMP's actions during the protests.
I've got quite a desire on behalf of my clients to ensure that the Prime Minister and other officials appear before this hearing and testify under oath.
Issues the government lawyer dismissed as mere procedure.
I think the sooner we get over the procedural parts of this inquiry that have bedeviled the inquiry, the better, and get on to hearing evidence and get to the facts.
I intend to move as expeditiously as possible with full regard to a fair hearing.
And with dozens of protesters having made complaints against 41 RCMP officers, there's a lot to be heard. And so even with the pledge to move quickly, this APEC hearing is likely to continue at least until the end of August. Ian Hannamansing, CBC News, Vancouver.
Thanks, guys.
And the trial of former BC Premier Glenn Clark got underway today. He's accused of breach of trust and accepting a benefit. Prosecutors say Clark tried to help a friend get a casino license in return for renovations to his house and cottage.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News. 13 more people have died of COVID-19 since yesterday, with nearly 900 in hospital, 115 in the ICU. Meanwhile, one of BC's largest grocers is introducing capacity limits. Save On Foods will now operate at 50% until further notice. A 31-year-old man has been charged with second-degree murder in the death of his girlfriend at Metrotown in December. The victim is 25-year-old Melissa Blimke of North Vancouver. She was attacked in the mall parkade, stabbed, and then later died in hospital. Homicide investigators say the two were in a relationship for some time before the homicide. And Canada's inflation rate has gone up to a 30-year high of 4.8%. Grocery prices have increased by nearly 6%. That's the biggest gain in 10 years. Bad weather and supply chain disruptions are being partly to blame. No doubt you've noticed the rise in prices. We're all spending more, particularly on essentials like food. Economist and UBC professor Werner Entweiler joins us to make sense of the causes and the implications. Thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon, Anita.
The Consumer Price Index has risen sharply over the past year. The terrible perfect storm of extreme weather, labor shortages, and supply chain issues are, of course, being blamed. But can you explain how all of these events actually contribute?
Yeah, the pandemic has really played havoc with both supply and demand. On the supply side, we have the shortages that have been well advertised now, everything from computer chips to the logistics with transportation. But also people have shifted from spending money on services to spending money on goods. And that has increased demand for household appliances, for example, which have actually risen very significantly in the last 12 months. So all combines to this perfect storm that we have now in prices rising quite steeply.
Is there anything that can actually be done about it?
Well, yes and no. On one hand, we see the pandemic actually has depressed certain prices in 2021 and in 2020, and then they have risen again in 2021. So now we're seeing a bit of a catching up, which is essentially a statistical artifact. If you look at a longer horizon and compare prices to 2019, it doesn't look quite so bad. But there are some things that are probably more permanent because some of the supply issues that will last for much longer. And this is something that could also translate into higher wage demands. And as soon as we get the spiral going between higher wages and higher prices, we're going to see inflation locking in for a longer time. But the Bank of Canada will look at the current numbers very eagerly and is worried about the prices actually going beyond their 3% target. And that is excluding the volatile food and energy prices. And if that is over 3%, we will likely see interest rate increases coming from the Bank of Canada in the next few months.
Now, the costs of anything coming into Canada from the U.S. or overseas is rising at an even faster rate. Can you talk about why that's happening?
Yeah, all the supply chains are somewhat distorted now through the pandemic conditions, and there are labor shortages that has actually increased the cost of transportation. All the goods that are coming across the border are kind of slowing down because the truckers have to follow the COVID protocol. And that all combines to slowing down the whole process that we have relied upon in the past to work just seamlessly and fast and efficiently. And all this, in the end, means there are shortages that lead to higher prices that we all end up paying as consumers.
Werner Antweiler, thank you for being with us.
You're very welcome.
Well, everywhere you look in the Lower Mainland, electric vehicles. But in Canada's far north, they are a much rarer breed. We look at why next. And at 6:45, a live look at a cold and very snowy Prince George tonight. And snow is actually falling right now, but some warmer weather is on the way. Will we warm up too? Coming up, Johanna breaks it down.
The Yukon government has a database of about 500 plane crashes in the Yukon.
The U.S. Air Force was flying military personnel south out of Alaska.
It was headed to Great Falls, Montana. 44 people on board, 3 civilians, the woman with her child, and she was pregnant.
It baffles me. You just wonder how could something that big not be found yet.
They were flying at 200 miles an hour. At the right altitude, everything was fine. They flew over Snag and reported to Snag radio, and their next station to talk to would have been Ajax, and they didn't report Ajax.
The C-54 Skymaster, you know, it was one of the most significant search and rescue operations ever carried out in North America. Thousands of people were involved looking for the plane, hundreds of aircraft.
But they knew nothing about searching.
He went out every year searching for her. He never, ever gave up his search for her.
He told Mother that one day he was going to leave and never come back. Mother said all he had to do was reach over and tap a switch to send out an SOS. I just hope it was instant.
My mother was home at the time that this would have happened, and she said that all of a sudden she felt like she was on fire. She felt the plane had crashed and burned.
I cannot, for the life of me, understand why the search would not have been taken up again later in the summer when all the snow is gone.
This is a period of history that I think the forces would rather forget.
This is the little certificate that Barack Obama sent, and that's it. That's all we ever got.
It is a sad occasion when you can't get someone to come out and look for 44 people.
And if that is going to be the way it is, you know what? I think we can get the government back on board. We can maybe embarrass them enough to say, look, you don't leave people behind.
People in the Yukon have been looking for this aircraft ever since it crashed. They're always looking out for bits and pieces of wreckage. We haven't stopped searching. They have not been forgotten.
You can't hide something that big forever.
Okay, most drivers know that cold winter weather can be a major drain on a car battery. So what does that mean for electric vehicles, especially in places where it gets really cold and destinations are very far apart? Linny Lambering takes a look at how the government is trying to address those challenges.
It's small, it's bright red, and it's fully electric. This car, named Sparky, belongs to the Yellowknife Car Share Co-op.
All right. Welcome aboard.
France Benoit says the Chevrolet Volt starts up no problem in -40, but the battery does lose about half its range when it's extremely cold.
This winter we have 50, 60 kilometer average, and then in the summer it's 120, it's easy.
How far you can go in an electric vehicle depends a lot on the make and model you buy. For example, there's a Tesla in Hay River that can go twice as far. Patricia Ray and her husband own a standard range Tesla Model 3.
We got it because we knew we weren't going to travel south in it. We were going to use it just for in-town. It's just the in-town car.
An in-town car. Ray and Benoit say electric cars are good for driving in communities. But the drive between communities is another story. After you leave Yellowknife, there are only 3 chargers on the way to High Level. It's something the territorial government is looking into. They've commissioned a report which proposes a corridor of fast charging stations from Yellowknife to Alberta. The northern leg would include stations in Birch Lake, Betchacon, Fort Providence, Kakiza, and Enterprise. Beyond that, there are 2 options, one that goes to Fort Smith, another that goes to 60th Parallel Territorial Park. The report says the latter would be best because it has more traffic and it's closer to the next charging station south of the border. The entire project would cost the territory about $1.5 million. It would reduce emissions at a cost of about $1,800 per ton.
Compared to other initiatives in the energy strategy, is a very good investment in terms of dollars per ton greenhouse gas emissions reduction.
This charging network is a drop in the bucket when compared to the territory's overall goals. The NWT is committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by another 283 kilotons by 2030. This network would reduce emissions by 0.295 kilotons, which is the equivalent of taking 90 cars off the road. Linny Lambering, CBC News, Yellowknife.
Let's check in again with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe, and the moment is here, that debate that you've been talking about. Let's hear about
it.
Yes,
the fog versus the sun in the long-range forecast. And I think the sun has taken back a couple of days. Let me tell you why. Now, these fog hoover setups need a particular amount of ingredients, and we have all of those in place with a high pressure and building inversion. We are looking to see an inversion, but we may end up with a couple sunny days before that fog sets in. Let me break it down for you. Starting off with our current temperatures, one of those ingredients is milder air. We've got an 8 right now in through YVR, and temperatures actually expected to hit the double digit. The model is actually bumping those temperatures up a good 4 degrees from our average high for this time of the year, based on our 30-year average anyway. A system pushing in from the coast, bringing steady snow to other parts of the province tonight. We have that rain across the south coast. We are seeing a 2 to 5 centimeter shot in through places like Kelowna overnight, 5 to 10 centimeters up towards Prince George, and for the highway passes, much more, 15 plus over towards Paris, Kitimat, and Stewart. We're talking 30 centimeters by tomorrow morning. It's basically been snowing all day, and we will see a risk for freezing rain for Williams Lake, Prince George, Fort St. John, because temperatures are actually going to warm up as this warmer air pushes north. So that Arctic air descended across central and northern BC yesterday. Now it's pushing back. Okay, back to the rainfall. Just looking at a general 10 to 20 millimeters overnight tonight. So the steadiest rain we've seen all week for the south coast. but clearing quite dramatically tomorrow, as I'll show you. Victoria, we've got you at a 9. Notice those temperatures across the interior, definitely up a good 10 degrees from where you were at the past couple of days. But again, as those temperatures slide past the freezing mark and we see precip, a chance of freezing rain, and that's showing up in pink on that forecast model. So a good shot for everyone who's seen that warm up tomorrow. Okay, now focus your eyes on the south coast. Here's Thursday morning into Thursday afternoon. Notice the clearing in the both cloud and precip model. We get behind that cold front nice and quickly. We'll see some gusts tomorrow morning, but then we'll get back into that sunshine and double-digit temperatures. So the inversion or the high pressure really starts to build Friday and Saturday. There's a chance we could end up with pretty decent sunny days. Saturday, we're going to start to see the cumulative effects of that building ridge. So it's one of the 2 days that I think Vancouver will descend upon the south coast. A good chance it'll last through early next week. Notice I replaced the dire icons that seem to indicate the world was ending with a more transparent or more visible fog, shall we say, Anita. So something for everyone, along with uncertainty in the long-range forecast.
Well, I was going to say, I definitely noticed that because producer Matthew was not happy with that fog icon yesterday.
Oh, no, I heard about it this morning.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
You'd think they'd take it to like a penguin to water, but turns out the Antarctic birds do need to learn to swim. Meet baby Charlie next.
About 80 residents at Bishop's Gardens in St. John's are quarantining alone in their rooms after a COVID-19 exposure. All residents have tested negative, but they still have to isolate for another week. That means long, lonely days for some, especially those who can't connect with family and friends. Last week, Bishop's Gardens introduced a new program called Tea and a Yarn. It's looking for volunteers to visit with residents at the home virtually. Edwin Richards, a resident at the home, says the program will help seniors feel less alone and will also be beneficial for volunteers.
They get to know their experiences and someone chat with and hear stories, hopefully uplifting stories that will cheer them up.
Mike Powell is the president of the company that owns Bishop's Gardens. He says some residents have loved ones they can connect with, but others aren't so lucky. Powell says Tea and a Yarn will give those seniors much needed social interaction.
So it's a really great chance for us as people just to rally around our elders and try and support their mental health as much as possible during a difficult time.
Bishop's Gardens is accepting volunteers for the program through Facebook. Daryl Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
A backpack filled with tactile toys and books gets unpacked at South Centre Mall. It's a lifesaver for parents of kids who struggle with the stimulation of a shopping trip.
Parents can just rent one of the backpacks and then bring it back when they are done with their shopping trip. It's very easy and flexible for everyone.
The program's being made possible thanks to a partnership with two charities, Calgary Wild Rose Lions Club and Variety, the children's charity of Alberta.
We've got resources that have tactile toys. We have resources to reduce some of the external stimuli that, can filter out the lights, can filter out the sounds. We've got resources that help self-direct kids, fun things, educational resources, and just things for them to do.
It's about giving kids with sensory disabilities the chance to participate in activities that most of us take for granted.
They tend to stay away from public places, so they don't get that life experience that the same as all of their peers are having. So for them to have the tools here, I think that would just make their world even bigger and give them a better life experience overall.
Dan McGarvey, CBC News, Calgary.
Let's flip now to a story about a small bird who is making a big splash, dipping down under. It was a big day in the pool for penguin chick Charlie. The 3-month-old has just started swimming lessons at the Sydney Zoo. Zookeepers say Charlie has now sprouted waterproof plumage for added protection during the plunge. And the little one got a chance to try out the deep end with a little help from his friends. Charlie is a Gen 2 penguin. The species is known to be the fastest underwater swimming bird, and it reaches speeds of up to 36 kilometers an hour. I always love any time we do any stories about birds. Great way to end our show tonight. Just beautiful creatures. That is it for CBC Vancouver News on January 19th. Thanks for watching. And tomorrow, Dan will be here. Have a good night and weekend.